Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Ukraine dam supplying water to Crimea destroyed. So, this article is from Kyle Anzalone. And the big news on Tuesday was that the Nova Kakhovka Dam, which is located in southern Ukraine along the Dnipro River, was destroyed early on Tuesday. While Kiev and Moscow are accusing each other of the attack, Russia will suffer more consequences of the dam's destruction. So on Tuesday, all day, the media, members of Congress have been blaming Russia. Ukraine, of course, is blaming Russia, but we haven't seen, any evidence that Russia was behind this attack. So this dam was built by the USSR during the 1950s, and for over a year now, it's been on the front lines of the war in Ukraine, and it is controlled by Russia. It's a big dam. It's nearly 100 feet tall and over 10,000 feet wide. The dam was constructed as a hydroelectric power plant and created the Kakhovka Reservoir, which is over 2,000 square kilometers. Europe's largest nuclear power plant, which is the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and the Crimean Peninsula receive water from the reservoir. An explosion reportedly ripped through the dam on Tuesday morning, causing flooding to begin downstream. It's unclear. It's not really clear what happened. It seems like explosives might have been placed, or there's also reports saying that the dam was damaged in other attacks, so it could have just, given way. The most immediate impact of the dam's destruction is flooding in the surrounding areas, which is expected to displace at least 16,000 people. A Ukrainian official said that 8 towns have already been partially or completely flooded, and the flooding is expected to be worse in areas controlled by Russia. The region will also suffer environmental damage from the flooding, and tons of industrial lubricant is used in the hydroelectric power plant, so that is going to be, spreading everywhere. And another concern is the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is controlled by Russian forces. The Kakhovka Reservoir provided cooling water to the massive power plant, but so far the IAEA, which is the UN nuclear watchdog, they said that there is no immediate nuclear safety risk as a result. So Kiev immediately blamed Moscow for the attack, calling it a terrorist attack and war crime. Ukraine's defense ministry suggested that Russia destroyed the dam as a tactical defense of the region. Zelensky claimed it was impossible for the Ukrainians to carry out the attack on the dam. However, Kyle includes some important context here. Ukrainian Major General Andriy Kovalchuk told the Washington Post last year that he considered attacking the dam during Ukraine's counteroffensive. And again, this was last year. So the Post reported, quote, the Ukrainians even conducted a test strike with a HIMARS launcher on one of the floodgates at the Nova Kakhovka Dam, making 3 holes in the metal to see if the Dnieper's water could be raised enough to stymie Russian crossings but not flood nearby villages. The test was a success, end quote. Again, according to this Ukrainian military officer. So Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, he said that Ukrainian forces were behind the destruction, so Russia's blaming Ukraine. The attack on the dam is going to impact a very core Russian concern in Crimea, which is the water supply to the Crimean Peninsula. That was one of the motives for invading, was that Ukraine was cutting off water supplies to Crimea. So I would find it hard to believe that Russia would do something like this that can threaten that again. But we ultimately don't know exactly what happened here. But I think the important point is that if you look at the motives, it seems like Russia has much less of a motive to do this. And, we know that Ukraine has lied before about things that they blamed on Russia, like the Poland missile incident. When a missile landed in Poland and killed 2 people, Ukraine blamed Russia, even though they must have known that it was a stray Ukrainian air defense missile at the time. So we'll see what comes out of this. The White House said that they don't know. They're not taking Ukraine's side. But again, you have the media and people in Congress just immediately blaming Russia. So maybe we'll find out more in the next few days or the next few weeks about what really happened here. All right, the next one here. The U.S. is not concerned about Ukrainian attacks in Russia escalating the war. So the New York Times reported on Monday that the Biden administration has shrugged off Ukrainian attacks inside Russia as U.S. officials are no longer as concerned about escalation as they were earlier in the war. The report said that during the first year of the war, Biden administration officials were worried that if Ukraine hit targets inside Russia, Moscow could retaliate against NATO. But those fears are gone as the administration does not seem concerned over the recent attacks inside Russia, which have included drone attacks on residential areas in Moscow and cross border raids in Russia's Belgorod region that were carried out using U.S. armored vehicles. They put a quote in from John Kirby, who's the spokesman for the National Security Council. When he was asked about Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, he said, "It's not like we're going to look into this or investigate it." Basically saying that, when he said that when he was asked if the U.S. thought Ukraine was behind these attacks. And according to the New York Times, administration officials seem to be even less concerned behind closed doors. So they're not really worried at all now. And this has kind of been a pattern throughout the war. As we know, the US and its allies have been sending weapons that they previously said they would not give Ukraine over concerns of escalation, including tanks and now warplanes. Now, the US signing off on sending the F 16s when in the early days of the war, they didn't even want Poland sending their MiGs because they thought Russia might perceive that as NATO directly entering the war. But now, over a year later, Poland has sent their MiGs and Biden has given the green light to send F-16s. And the U.S. also used to be more concerned about the possibility of Putin using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, but that concern has waned as well. U.S. officials think that Putin might only use a nuke if he feels cornered or if his control of Crimea is threatened. And despite that assessment, it's interesting. One of the few things U.S. officials think Putin might use a nuke over is losing control of Crimea, but they're also supporting Ukrainian attacks on Crimea. Victoria Nuland said explicitly that the U.S. supports Ukrainian attacks on Crimea, and Jake Sullivan recently reaffirmed, this has been said by multiple U.S. officials, that their restrictions, they ask Ukraine not to use American weapons on Russian territory, but that doesn't apply to Crimea. And so really what, we get from this is that the Biden administration's lack of concern about escalating the war appears to be based only on the fact that Putin has not taken action against NATO up to this point. But it's very clear that as this war drags out and the U.S. and NATO increase support for Ukraine, it's going to make a direct clash between NATO and Russia more likely. But the Biden administration just cares less and less about that risk. All right, the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone again over at the Libertarian Institute. Eastern NATO members demand that the alliance give multi-year defense commitments to Ukraine. So a 9-nation bloc within NATO is preparing to push the alliance to adopt a multi-year plan for arming Ukraine. And this is the Bucharest 9, which includes Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. They had a meeting on Tuesday ahead of the upcoming NATO summit that we keep talking about in Vilnius that will be held in July. So they put out a joint statement that said, quote, "We aim for a more robust, multi-year and comprehensive support package for Ukraine, which will reinforce its defense capabilities also by implementing NATO standards and increasing interoperability with NATO. We see merit in several allies' proposals to establish a joint analysis, training, and education center with Ukraine based in Poland." End quote. So they say that they expect Kiev will receive a clear path toward NATO membership at Vilnius. They said, quote, "We expect that in Vilnius, we will upgrade our political relations with Ukraine to a new level and launch a new political track that will lead to Ukraine's membership in NATO once conditions allow. We will continue our support to Ukraine on this path, end quote. So, in this group is Hungary, which kind of usually doesn't go along with the more hawkish NATO members, but the Eastern European countries, the Baltic states, Poland, they have been much more gung ho than other countries in NATO. So they're really pushing to give Ukraine a big commitment. And I know I've been kind of covering this a lot, but it does seem like this summit, next month is going to be pretty, something big could come out of it when it comes to NATO support for Ukraine. All right, the next one here. Lavrov notes that F-16s can carry nuclear weapons. So Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Monday that Moscow must keep in mind that American-made F-16 fighter jets are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. The Russian diplomat made the comments when warning how the U.S. and NATO are escalating their role in the conflict in Ukraine. President Biden recently signed off on European countries delivering U.S.-made F-16s to Ukraine, although it's not yet clear how many Kiev will receive or when they will be delivered. Lavrov said this during a visit to a Russian military base in Tajikistan. He said, quote, "Anything can be expected from the leaders of the U.S. and other Western countries. They are already proving this when following advanced long-range weapons and tanks. They are now seriously preparing F-16s. We must keep in mind that one of the modifications of the F-16 has the capability to deliver nuclear weapons," end quote. So F-16s are capable of carrying B-61 nuclear gravity bombs, which the U.S. stores in several European countries. Under NATO's nuclear sharing program, there are U.S. B-61 nuclear bombs deployed in Italy, Germany, Turkey, Belgium, and the Netherlands. So when Putin recently announced that he was deploying nukes to Belarus, he compared his move to NATO's nuclear sharing program. All right, the next one here. The Washington Post says that the U.S. knew Ukraine planned to attack the Nord Stream pipelines. So the Washington Post reported on Tuesday that the U.S. received intelligence in June 2022 about a Ukrainian plot to bomb the Nord Stream natural gas pipeline that connects Russia to Germany. So this report omitted Seymour Hersh's reporting that said President Biden ordered the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines. That was not mentioned in this Washington Post report. The Post cited an intelligence assessment leaked to Discord by Airman Jack Teixeira, but they did not publish the document. So, it's tough to know if these are legitimate leaks or if they're kind of being fed this information or really if they have anything like that, because again, they don't publish the documents. So this report said that an unnamed European country's intelligence service shared information with the CIA about the alleged Ukrainian plot. So the Post said that the Ukrainian plotters were not rogue operatives, but reported directly to Valery Zaluzhny, which is the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces. The report said that they initially planned to attack the pipelines at the end of NATO exercises in the Baltic Sea in June 2022, known as Balt Ops. And interestingly, according to Seymour Hersh's report, U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on the Nord Stream pipelines during the Balt Ops, and they were detonated by a Norwegian spy plane dropping a sonar buoy in the area on September 26, 2022. The idea that the U.S. suspected Ukrainian involvement in the Nord Stream bombings first surfaced in a New York Times report that was published on March 7th. So that report said that the U.S. suspected a pro-Ukrainian group carried out the bombings. Now, this new thing from the Washington Post is tying it directly to Zaluzhny, which is interesting. So, according to Seymour Hersh, that initial report in the New York Times about the pro-Ukrainian group was a cover-up planted by the CIA. So who knows what the real story is here, but it's interesting now that they're more directly blaming Ukraine. And according to this new story, Ukraine was planning to do it with 6 operatives, special forces operatives. They're going to rent a boat and plant these explosives. Doesn't say if that's the plan that they went through with or what, but still, it's just interesting that, again, they're directly pinning this on Ukraine now. And so Hersh's allegations that President Biden ordered the bombing, they haven't been confirmed by other sources at this point. But we do know that the U.S. had a clear motive for the attack. The U.S. had tried to stop the construction of Nord Stream 2 for years using sanctions. And of course, on February 7th, 2022, before Russia invaded Ukraine, President Biden vowed to bring an end to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia did invade Ukraine. So new Nord Stream story, maybe one day we'll really know the truth here. But again, going back to the dam story, when the Nord Stream pipelines were first blown up, the media just went with the idea that it was Russia when Russia clearly did not have the motive. And now we know for sure that it wasn't Russia. All these reports say that. So, just got to keep all that in mind. All right, the next one here, the House Armed Services Committee chair wants a China spending bill. So Representative Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, he is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. He said on Tuesday that he wants Congress to pass a supplemental spending bill this year to address so-called threats from China. So Rogers' comments came after President Biden. He signed the legislation into law that included the debt ceiling deal that was reached between the White House and House Republicans. It includes a massive $886 billion military budget for 2024. But for hawks in Congress, that's not enough. And Rogers said that once Congress completes the work on the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act and related appropriations bills, then he's going to see if they actually spend enough on addressing China. And he said if they do, that's fine. And if they don't, then he's going to look for more funding. He says it's all about China. So under the debt ceiling deal, emergency supplemental funds are exempt from spending caps, and hawks are looking to use them to increase military spending. So that's what it sounds like Rogers is going to try for. All the Ukraine spending, the $113 billion that was authorized so far was authorized as emergency supplemental funding. So that means the debt ceiling deal puts no constraints on Ukraine aid. And I know they want to use the supplementals to arm Taiwan, but now this also just seems like more any kind of spending that they could justify, use China to justify, which is all of the military buildups going on in the Asia Pacific, from Australia to the Philippines to Japan to South Korea. There's a lot that they can, use to justify, use China as a justification for all this spending. He also said that that when it comes to Ukraine, he would want it to be at a smaller level than what they've done before. So he's sounding like he wants to wind down the amount that the U.S. is spending on Ukraine to focus on China, which even though the U.S. is doing all this in Ukraine with Russia, still the Pentagon and all the other government agencies do say China is the top priority. And the next one here, Indo-Pacific Command says that the U.S. is ready to fight and win a war with China. This is a story from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute, and this is more, another example of the U.S. military, U.S. officials openly discussing preparing for a direct war with China, not a proxy war, a direct war. So the commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral John Aquilino, he highlighted the military's threatening posture toward China, speaking at the annual meeting of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations last month, which is interesting because that group is known for encouraging engagement between the U.S. and China. And yet another confirmation that the White House has overturned the long-standing strategic ambiguity policy regarding Taiwan. Aquilino went so far as to say President Joe Biden and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin have tasked him to win a war against China if Beijing attacks the island. So he said, quote, "What I can tell you is that the Secretary and the President have tasked me with two missions. The first is to prevent this conflict. And then the second one is if I fail at mission one, to be ready and prepared to fight and win. The United States military is manned, trained, equipped, postured, and ready to execute both of those missions," end quote. So, again, it's just very unsettling to hear all this rhetoric, especially as the tensions between the U.S. and China are so bad. So just another example of that. All right, the next one here, Iran reopens its embassy in Saudi Arabia. So on Tuesday, Iran reopened its embassy in Saudi Arabia after 7 years, and this is the result of the normalization deal between Tehran and Riyadh that was brokered by China. During a ceremony at the embassy in Riyadh, Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Alireza Bigdeli hailed the ties between the two nations. He said, quote, "We consider today an important day in the relations of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The cooperation between the two countries is entering a new era," end quote. So the opening of the Iranian embassy coincided with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's arrival in Saudi Arabia. Blinken is expected to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and his visit comes as the Biden administration is pushing for a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which seems unlikely right now as the Saudis are focusing on boosting ties with Iran, and they just restored diplomatic relations with Syria. Because a big aspect, a big reason why the U.S. and Israel are pushing for these normalization deals between Israel and the Arab countries is that they want to form an anti-Iran alliance in the region. But these steps kind of go against that. And as I covered the other day, Iran's naval commander said last week that Iran is actually looking to form a naval alliance with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and the other Gulf Arab states, which really, the U.S. and Israel would really not be happy about that. I think they might take some pretty drastic measures to prevent it. And that kind of one thing I am concerned about is that right now the Saudis have a ton of leverage over the U.S. And it seems like Biden really wants to get this normalization deal done before the presidential elections. He wants to score, a big one for the Israel lobby. And, the Saudis are just in a good position where they can get what they want from the U.S. And what they want is, basically a security guarantee. So, like a formal military alliance that the U.S. would come to defend the Saudis if they're attacked. So, it's kind of concerning, especially, when it comes to the war in Yemen. There's been these peace talks, but the war's not settled. There's no deal has been signed. It can always escalate again. So if the Saudis think, that the U.S. completely has their back again, there's a chance that war could escalate. But hopefully not. Hopefully the Saudis are, focusing more on building ties with Iran and are realizing the benefits of peace. All right, the next one here, Abu Akleh report does not shed new light on killing. So this is from the Middle East Eye, and this is Senator Chris Van Hollen. He said that the administration's report on the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is unable to provide new information on the death because Washington's investigation was blocked Washington's investigation was blocked from access to key witnesses. So Van Hollen, who was finally able to take a look at the report on Abu Akleh's killing at the hands of Israeli forces, after weeks of demanding it from the State Department, he commended the Biden administration for completing the review, but said that he had been made aware that the U.S. was not allowed access to certain witnesses. So he's basically saying it's an incomplete report. It doesn't put shed new light on the killing or what the people who fired at her were thinking while they did it, the Israeli forces. She was wearing a big vest that said press. She was shot in the neck. And there's claims that they were returning fire, but witnesses and reports from multiple media outlets say that there was no gun battle going on or anything. All right, the last one here. The U.S. falsely accuses Roger Waters of anti-Semitism. That's right, the U.S. government. The State Department has falsely accused rock legend Roger Waters, who's a co-founder of Pink Floyd. They've accused him of anti-Semitism over a recent performance in Germany. So Waters has come under criticism for a May 17th show in Berlin where he donned an outfit that resembled a Nazi uniform, which is part of a performance of the legendary Pink Floyd album, The Wall. In response to the criticism, Waters released a statement that said the elements of the show he was criticized for are clearly a statement in opposition to fascism, injustice, and bigotry. He said, quote, "Attempts to portray these elements as something else are disingenuous and politically motivated. The depiction of an unhinged fascist demagogue has been a feature of my show since Pink Floyd's The Wall in 1980, end quote. So yeah, it's a performance he's been doing for decades and decades. And the reason why this happened, why he was smeared like this, is because he is supportive of Palestinian rights and he's been critical of the Israeli government. He's often falsely accused of being an anti-Semite by people, but this is the U.S. State Department doing it. But because of that, this concert was taken out of context. Some people posted it on social media and said, "Oh, look, Roger Waters acting like a Nazi in Germany. How anti-Semitic of him." And Deborah Lipstad, who is the U.S. Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, she joined in on the smears on Twitter, accusing Waters of despicable Holocaust distortion. Also, his dad was killed fighting against the Nazis. He's British, and his dad, fought in World War II. Kind of important context. On Monday, Sam Husseini, who's a great journalist, we run a lot of his stuff at antiwar.com. He asked the State Department about the comments. He was at the State Department press briefing asking the spokesman. Also, Matt Lee, who's a reporter for AP, he got in on the questioning. So Husseini asked, and the AP got a written response from the State Department, and they backed the smears of Roger Waters. The State Department said, quote, "The concert in question, which took place in Berlin, contained imagery that is deeply offensive to Jewish people and minimized the Holocaust. The artist in question has a long track record of using anti-Semitic tropes to denigrate Jewish people," end quote. So again, just a complete smear from the U.S. government. And I like the way Sam was asking pretty tough questions. And he said that, that the U.S. official, the anti-Semitism envoy, was, denigrating Waters because he defends Palestinian rights. And that's really why they go after him. And, the State Department is just completely backing that up. So just really, sad to see. Not surprising, though, but and a disclosure that I put at the end of the article is that we've received donations from Roger Waters, pretty big support in a few of our fundraisers. You probably remember because we would put it at the top of the page whenever we get a contribution from him, because it's pretty cool to get support from Roger Waters. But that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Gilbert Doctorow. The Ukrainian army is run not by the generals, but by the PR department. One from Patrick Eddington. It was all in vain. Edward Snowden's sacrifice 10 years on. It's been 10 years. Wow. Daniel Larison, hawks hallucinate a U.S.-China detente policy that does not exist. That's over at Responsible Statecraft. It's a good article. He's saying that these China hawks are trying to go after Biden for being weak on China, which is just not true. He's a huge China hawk. One from William J. Astore, The End Stage of American Empire. And then our spotlight is from Ted Galen Carpenter, who's one of our guys, but this is over at the Future Freedom Foundation. No, it is not possible to be an imperial libertarian. And that is it. That's everything for today. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Help us out by, sharing the website around, sharing this show, telling your friends about antiwar.com and the work that we do. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thank you for listening.